Welcome in, welcome back. Welcome to Stream-of-Unconsciousness, where the subject's made up and the words don't matter. Today we launch into part one of our 29-part adaptation of King Solomon's Wines. King Solomon's Wines. Sorry, it's too early for a Monty Python reference. Now, what I thought I'd do today is I thought we would work on a video on how to create an RTV silicone mold for casting miniatures. Now, I tend to sculpt my own miniatures. I used to sell a few and still would if people are interested. But I also like to cast my own figures because I just like seeing them in metal. And they're a little bit more robust once they're cast. So the whole process of how you go about making a gravity pour room temperature vulcanizing mold, RTV mold. And yeah, we're gonna go through that process with this little, my finished Indiana Jones figure here. And I think we're going to split it into two parts, so this will be part the first. As we get into this, thanks to all the people who have recently subscribed and commented and liked. I'm glad that you are enjoying what's going on, and hopefully this will continue in that vein. So let's get to it. So first thing, here we are showing off the miniature again, just getting a good view of all sides. I put a lot of work into that Indiana Jones. I really enjoy it. So we need a couple things when we do this. We need a flat base because we're using clay as the bed. We need a box. I generally make my boxes out of Legos at this point. Depending on what you're doing, what kind of casting you're doing, you can make the boxes out of different stuff. I know that people do a lot of mold making for plastic casting. They tend to use like foam core that's been hot glued together, which is fine. Basically, you just want, I've used Monster Clay, now I'm trying it out for the first time. I've used Sculpey, I've used Super Sculpey. You basically want a medium that is soft enough to embed the figure, but enough that it's not gonna, stick to the miniature too much or stain it. And it also has to be sulfur free. You don't want it reacting with the RTV silicone. But basically, in effect, you just take enough to fill the mold halfway. You embed the figure halfway in it, and then, as you can see, you start smoothing it out around the figure, making sure that it's completely up to the edge. There are no gaps. The problem with silicone, especially when you do the way I do it, which is I put it into a pressure pot to reduce the bubbles, remove the bubbles in the mold. The silicone will literally go wherever the hell it wants if there's a gap for it to get into. So you want to make sure that this is all, the clay itself is all pressed right up against the miniature and smooth. This is not as smooth as it could be, but it gets there. The reason I'm trying the Monster Clay is I've used, as I said, Super Sculpey, which was good, and Sculpey, which was okay. The problem with bakeable clays is that the more you handle them, the less pliable they become, and the more you have to work them to get to do this, to get them to be able to be usable for this. Just because that's the nature of them. The heat is what makes them cure. I'm not saying the heat of your hands is going to make absolutely certain that the clay cures, but it does reduce its elasticity and its moisture. So the problem with Sculpey, I found, as opposed to Super Sculpey, is that while Sculpey itself is very soft, it's also much more sticky than I would like, and it ended up, I did make a mold with using just Sculpey, and it had a tendency to leave bits in the details on the model. And obviously, if you're trying to make a good, clean cavity to pour a copy of the miniature, you really don't want that to be full of, you don't want the details to be filled. You don't want solid, weird casting. You want all the fine details that you spent literal hours of your life working on. So, yeah, it's an involved process. As you can tell, I've sped up the process a tiny bit here. Once you get into it and you're concentrating, it's not so bad, but probably not as exciting to watch as people would think if you watch it real time. But, so again, basically just build it up, smooth it out, build it up, smooth it out, build it up, smooth it out. You want to make sure, again, that you're not filling in any details on the front half of the mold. And the reason you're trying to do halfway of the mold, obviously, is not just that you want, you know, half of the figure to be in each half of the mold, but also you don't want to get part of the figure embedded in one side of the mold. Once that happens, it's not only is it difficult to remove, it's difficult to cast something like that it's just a void in one side of the mold, but it also reduces the mold life. The more you pull stuff out of that void, the more likely it is that you're going to rip the mold. Really, I mean, again, I don't do this professionally, so my molds are good for, you know, a dozen figures, maybe more, before they start having issues, depending on what I'm casting with. Sometimes plastic is a little bit tougher on the molds, but it really is the mold life of my molds isn't that well. That's not entirely true. I've got a few molds that have been around for a decade or so now. But yeah, it's what you're trying to do, again, is you don't want undercuts as much as you can avoid that, just because they're difficult to fill when you pour the metal or the plastic, and they also reduce the life of the mold. And adding clay, and adding clay. I do like the monster clay. The monster clay was kind of nice to work with. It is. I did order very soft. It comes in 3 different hardness levels: soft, medium, and hard. There's a joke in there somewhere that I'm not going to make, and I specifically chose the soft, having never used it before, because I knew what I was looking for in terms of trying to create the mold base. Here, as you can see, is I've added a bunch of clay, literal clay this time instead of just assuming the sculpt piece clay. I've added a bunch of the clay, and now I'm taking a clay shaper. I'm finally using the clay shaper for something besides putty, and smoothing this out so that I don't get all the jagged lines and valleys and hills and things. You want to make this as the mold half as smooth as possible, just so you don't have issues with closing the mold. You don't have issues with metal or plastic escaping from the cavity that you're trying to create. But you want to make sure that it's as smooth as... I mean, it doesn't have to be that smooth. You can see the base where I've still got huge, giant paw prints from my giant paws in there, and that's not such a big deal. It's smooth-ish, which is fine. Here, I'm adding a pour channel. You want to have some place to get your medium into the mold once it's created. You can cut this stuff in after you have made the mold. It's more difficult that way, and you have less control, or at least I do, trying to cut it in with a pair of snips or an X-Acto knife. But you want to make sure that you've got a clean channel to pour the medium, the metal, or whatever you're using into the mold. It's just easier to do it this way, again, because you have more control over how that exists and what it's doing. You can also, at this point, put in vents. I did not. As you can see, where the whip comes down, his arm with the whip, and the end of the torch there towards the bottom. Depending on what you're doing, metal is usually pretty good, especially on the way I've got this posed. For plastic, if you're pouring plastic, because plastic loves to have bubbles, even if you do use a vacuum chamber. Not a vacuum chamber, but a pressure pod. Excuse me. Really, vents would need to be created to let the air escape. And I actually did cut some stuff later in that, but that's a whole other story. As you can see here, now I'm putting in the lock areas, so that helps the mold when you put it back together go together successfully and without issues of the mold sliding around and you're not getting a good fit for a good cast. So here I'm using Smooth On Mold Star 15. This is a pretty quick curing room temperature vulcanizing silicone. It's 2 parts A and B. Really want to mix those up, especially mine because I haven't potted in a while. It's kind of old. But you want to mix those up, make sure that all the stuff you need is not on the bottom, that it hasn't settled and separated. I use this simple, I should be measuring by volume. I don't. I eyeball it. I'm using about level 2 there in the measuring cup. And basically what I do is I just do, because it's a half and half, it's 50-50 split. So I pour one side to the 2, and as you'll see, I will be pouring the next side to the 4. As demonstrated by our lovely model. So, again, you want to make sure it's all mixed before you put it together. So it will settle, and also as it gets older, it will separate. And you want to make sure that it's all mixed in correctly and not separated, or your mold will not cure. That's the other reason you want to make sure that you're mixing it 50-50. The farther off your mix is, the more of a chance you have of the silicone actually not curing. And if your silicone does not cure, then you just have a big goopy mess, and it takes a lot to clean off the model, it takes a lot to clean off the mold, and it's just gross. And as you can see, paper towels are a very important part of this process. You're mixing it up. Excuse me. You want to make sure that the 2 halves are completely mixed in. So you see the white there that I'm mixing in of the part A. You don't want to have any of that left. You want to make sure that it's all a consistent color. If you were doing this without a pressure pot, even the speeded up, I still was mixing it at a pretty good speed. That's going to cause air pockets in your silicone. So you want to make sure to try and mitigate that, because you want to shoot bubbles as possible. That's one of the reasons I use a pressure pot in my casting. So you take the mold box and silicone, and you very carefully start in one corner, pour it as slowly as possible. Again, this is sped up a bit so that people don't have to suffer through watching this in real time, because it takes a little bit. The reason we do this and have the thin stream like that is also to help reduce bubbles in the mold. The last thing you want is to have poured a major mold base, got your figure embedded, got the silicone going, and then you have a huge bubble that forms right next to the figure. And so when you try and cast it, what you get is the cast with a giant metal bubble or plastic bubble on the side of it, which, depending on how big it is and where it is, can ruin the detail on the model. So you want to make sure to get it all in there. There are probably good ways to figure out what kind of volume you need as far as which the half of the mold that you're trying to do. I've just been doing this long enough that I can sort of eyeball it and know what I need. So don't use me as an example for that. Please make sure that you check all the things you need to check because you can mix a second set of silicone, and it's a 50-50 split. So as long as you're hitting the 50-50 split, silicone very, very gladly sticks to itself and cures. But you want to make sure that it's easier if you don't have to do that. So here we're showing the pressure pot, which was made from an old paint pot. There are tutorials for that online. We're going to put the model in there. We are going to pop the lid on there and screw down the clamps. Unfortunately, one of the clamps, the screw is completely toast, and so I had to use an extra outside clamp. Oddly enough, they don't sell replacement clamps, even though they're clearly replaceable. So you chew that down as tightly as possible. We don't want any air escaping while this is curing. That will defeat the purpose of trying to press the bubbles out of the silicone. Here's the hose for the air compressor. Pop that on there. And just because I've been working with this stuff for a while, I know that it's about 60 psi, which the number 4 there is around. You can't see all the numbers on the dial, but the number 4 there is around the 60 psi. So once we get there, we'll shut it off. Everything's good, and we will continue on with number next as soon as the mold finishes curing.